Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, bodies washed in from Zimbabwe to Mozambique, flooding of devastating scale, victims still clinging to trees, and an ever-increasing death toll that's exceeded 550. Mozambique, Zimbabwe and Malawi struggle in the aftermath of Cyclone Idai. Also, Friday, it will be the last day of campaigning in the Comoros as the country heads into elections over the weekend. President Azali Assoumani is looking to secure another term of office, but his contenders say the system's already rigged against them. And the fourth largest tea exporter in the world is Kenya, and it is number one on the continent. Its positions being further secured as a side effect of ongoing tensions between India and Pakistan. We take a closer look with our correspondents. But first, Zimbabwe's declared 2 days of mourning to start this Saturday for the victims of Cyclone Idai. At least 259 people were killed in the country when the devastating storm hit southeastern Africa last weekend. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has said that affected communities are in despair. Aid agencies reckon that more than 200,000 Zimbabweans will need food aid over the next 3 months. Some are still stranded, and emergency services are struggling to get to severely flooded areas. Zimbabwe said that the waters have been so fierce that more than 120 bodies have been washed into neighbouring Mozambique.
Most of the bodies were washed away into Mozambique, and because they were in a really bad state, and we understand that culturally they could not keep these bodies without really us collecting them into Zimbabwe, because there is no communication whatsoever. There are no passages in those areas, so they ended up burying them.
We're also dealing with all types of medical emergencies, including labour, ladies who are in complicated labour, but due to the blocked roads, they're unable to be transferred to hospitals. So we've been collecting them and bringing them to.
The scale of the task is only matched by the scale of the flooding. Entire communities have been wiped out. On Thursday, the UN and governments affected by Cyclone Idai said that the overall death toll across Zimbabwe, Malawi and Mozambique has risen to over 550 people. That number is expected to keep rising. Airdrops have been stepped up. Survivors are still clinging to trees and rooftops, and about 15,000 people, many of them growing increasingly ill, may still need rescuing in Mozambique alone. Aisha Ismail tells us more.
As Mozambicans observe 3 days of national mourning, international aid and rescue workers are pouring into the capital, Maputo, to help with rescue and recovery operations. This after a tropical cyclone ripped through the country a week ago, leaving a trail of destruction and devastation. It's unclear how many people have died. Some say 200. But rescue and aid workers say the figure could be much higher. In the meantime, rescue and aid workers are working against the clock as more rains are predicted for the next couple of days. Neighbouring countries are also sending aid, with South Africa having deployed the South African National Defence Force. The Mozambican President, Filipe Nyusi, is appealing for more aid.
Well, Boeing's going to install a new safety feature as standard in its 737 MAX fleet and retrofit older vessels. The move comes after the March 10th Ethiopia Airlines crash, and a similar disaster for Indonesia's Lion Air last year left in total around 350 people dead. A cockpit warning light had been optional and may have warned earlier of problems that possibly contributed to the planes going down. A direct link between the Indonesian and the Ethiopian crashes has not yet been proven, but attention has focused on an automated flight control system that came into service 2 years ago with the MAX fleet. Friday will be the last day of campaigning in the Comoros as the country heads into elections this Sunday. President Azali Assoumani is looking to secure another term of office against 11 opposition contenders. Now, they say that the system is rigged A controversial new constitution could potentially allow the incumbent to stay on in power until 2026. Nicolas Chemin has more.
These last 2 decades, Azali Assoumani has often been in power in the Comoros. In 1999, he toppled the president and ruled for 3 years. Then, in 2002, he was elected president for 4 years. He won again in 2016. Last year, the constitution was changed following a referendum. If Assoumani wins the election on Sunday, he will now have the possibility of doing not 1 but 2 mandates. He keeps saying he will win in the first round, a statement that is worrying the opposition.
We set up a committee so there could be a dialogue between the opposition and the ruling party. Everything has been done to reassure the people. If despite that they're not reassured, that's their problem. I don't know why they're afraid.
The opposition says Assoumani is becoming increasingly authoritarian. In recent months, more than a dozen political leaders have been arrested, including former President Sambi. And the Supreme Court, whose members were all designated by Assoumani, has barred his main rivals from running. As a result, it's Mahmoud Ahamada, a lawyer who's new to politics, who will represent JUA, the main opposition party.
Scaring people, not allowing them to express themselves. I don't think that's what the people here want or deserve. The president has done his time. He has the right to retire from politics.
In all, 13 candidates are taking part in the election. The archipelago has 800,000 inhabitants and is one of the 10 poorest countries in the world.
In Mauritania, women's rights activists are fighting an uphill battle for tougher penalties for sexual violence and discrimination. It's a conservative nation and the topic is divisive. One draft piece of legislation aimed at punishing violence against women more severely has already been rejected twice by Parliament.
Zara has lived through a mother's worst nightmare. Months after the attack on her 5-year-old daughter, emotions are still raw.
He came, he took my daughter whilst I was asleep. He took her away and he raped her. She had to have an operation.
The rapist, a serial paedophile, was sentenced to 10 years in jail. But according to the Association of Women Heads of Family, sexual offenders in Mauritania are often released well before the end of their sentences. There are calls for more extensive legislation with regards to women's rights, and in 2016, new legislation was drafted seeking much harsher penalties for sexual violence.
We need this law because we know that violence against women is skyrocketing.
But in this religiously conservative country, the bill proved to be too controversial. It was rejected by Parliament twice and has now been withdrawn by the government.
We cannot adopt a law which contradicts Sharia law, which is the basis of the nation's constitution.
Opponents of the bill also criticise its wording. They say that the notion of gender in the title would pave the way for a possible defence of homosexuality, which is illegal in Mauritania. But among those that rejected the draft legislation, some are willing to seek a compromise to achieve better protection of women's rights.
Women clearly need this protection. No matter how tolerant our society is with regard to women, they're still considered as lesser in many regards, in mindsets and in many practices.
It's an opinion that's echoed by the NGO Human Rights Watch. In their report published in September, they said that even the draft legislation would not go far enough in tackling these issues.
Now, Kenya is the 4th largest tea exporter in the world and #1 in Africa. Its positions being further secured as a side effect of ongoing tensions between India and Pakistan. Now, the long brewing struggle between the neighbours has seen Pakistan scaling back on tea imports from India, and so it's turned to Kenya, which is happy to bag the business. Take a look.
Tea pickers are busy in these fields that just a few months ago nearly halted production after the price per kilogram of tea fell below €2. The drop of over 50 cents in 1 year meant warehouses full of tea couldn't sell their stock on the international market.
It worries me as being employed, because when there's not enough tea, I can also end up losing my job. The tea is the main cash crop in this region, so if there's no tea, actually there's no work.
After a rough start to the year, Kenya's tea industry seems to have found a solution in Pakistan. In 2018, the country imported 40% of Kenyan tea output, but now has even greater needs. Thanks to a renewed conflict, Pakistan can no longer buy Indian tea, a boon for producers here who can't rely on the local market.
Assuming like last year, I did about 18 million kilograms of tea. And what is taken by the Kenyans in this area maybe is 500 kilograms. Where do I take the other teas? I have to look for market.
In January, Kenya sold 30 million euros of tea to Islamabad. And with the Indo-Pakistani crisis ongoing, these numbers will likely increase. Industry experts say the impact could be hugely positive.
We're looking at a 10 to 15% increase in the price over time. Given there's an election in India and Narendra Modi wants to look tough, I don't see the tension subsiding yet, which means that the price of tea for Kenyan tea should remain strong.
Indicators suggest 2019 production will be lower than in 2018, but an increase in price could offset the output slowdown. Last year, Kenya exported over €1 billion worth of tea.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.